Recently, I had an opportunity to read this absolutely brilliant book called Antifragile by Nassim Taleb. It just blew my mind, and I thought it's a good idea to present that book and its content here in the way I understood it. First up about Taleb, some of his seminal books, Black Swan, the book that took the world by storm in the era of the global financial crisis, because it kind of quite explained how random things will impact the world. COVID was another black swan event, so that was a great book. Then he followed it up with a number of books. Fooled by Randomness was another great book. But beyond all that, Antifragile is something that kind of very, very important for, especially if you're an investor or if you're running your own business and enterprise. It's a book that I think you must covet. Let me start by running through what the content of the book is. First, Taleb sets the context of what this book is about. So he kind of divides the three concepts that are central for all of us. We already know what is fragile. Glass is fragile, you drop it, it will break. We also know what is resilient, what will not break if it falls down. But Taleb tries and kind of explains that there is another side. Fragile is when things shatter, resilient when they undergo no change. And then he takes the concept of anti-fragile, things that actually benefit from stress, from problems, from random stuff that comes. This is where the genius of this book lies. And he talks about this whole concept of anti-fragile. Believe me, it's mind-blowing. Just to give you an example of these three. Let's say you're a senior corporate executive working in a large corporate. You are fragile. Anything that happens to the economy, any problem that happens in your industry, any problem that happens to your company, you are bound to lose your job. And given that you're certainly senior in your hierarchy in your corporate, it's likely that you're not going to get another job so quickly. And if there's a problem industry-wide, then there are hundreds of people searching for a job. So it's quite likely that your job search isn't going to be successful in the short time. So you are in a fragile zone. Let us say, on the other hand, you are a taxi driver. You have number of trips in a day. Some trips may not yield you the great satisfaction. Some may not even be profitable the way you want it to be. But it doesn't matter. No single customer of yours is so large that they can impact you big time. Your life is a series of customers all through. So you will still continue to kind of do your stuff. So you're reasonably resilient as compared to the senior corporate executive. Although your earnings are low, you are more resilient than the big senior corporate executive. Your risks are lesser. But the YouTuber is really the anti-fragile person. Reason is, if he does a great video, then he'll have a lot of people following him. And in today's day and age, if he does a lousy video, that also gets shared. People love to criticize, people love to pass their opinion, and so even bad work on the internet sometimes gets an enormous following on there. Towards that, the YouTuber is an anti-fragile person. This is how Taleb introduces the concept of fragile, resilient, and anti-fragile. He goes on to talk the next about naive intervention. What is naive intervention? Naive intervention is trying to do something to help, but really the effect is extremely the opposite. Simple example. In the medical fraternity, we often see people who constantly use sterile hand wash to wash their hands. They are almost obsessed with any kind of bacteria or germs. They're constantly changing. And the view that the medical community has is that if somebody overdoes this impacts their immunity. Eventually, their immunity levels will drop to the point that they will get very, very sick even at the smallest exposure. As compared to that, if somebody is just normal, doesn't overdo, then I think they're better off. Similarly, people who wear a face mask. If you're sick or if you're exposed to a large area where you're not sure, perfectly okay. But if every day and day out you're obsessed about wearing a face mask, then it does bring down your immunity because you don't get exposed to germs. And some of these germs are meant to increase your immunity. And by not exposing yourself, your immunity goes down. Similarly is the case with people who pop an antibiotic at the smallest of reasons. It's good to have cold once in a while, good to have a viral fever once in a while. Just let that course run itself through. The cold will come and go by itself. The viral fever will come for 2-3 days and go by itself. Take rest, have lots of water. That's the solution that's important. On the other hand, there are lots of people at the slightest sign of cold or fever, they will pop some antibiotic. Eventually, doctors advise that such people become resistant to antibiotics and therefore they have the risk of falling really ill where no medicine will work for them. So this is what we call naive intervention. Intervention that is actually doing more harm than good to you. Taleb talks about concavity and convexity as two very important concepts in fragile nature. And to give an example of concavity, there are many times in a place, in a busy city like Chennai, where you take a car, you're driving at a 5 kilometer, you're coming out of your parking lot, there's a pillar. Sometimes because you've not noticed it, you do a small scratch. On the road, there's an auto that goes by you, gives you a small scratch. These are low speed, you're just getting off the signal, somebody kind of bumps into you. All these happens. Nothing happens to the vehicle except the looks kind of get a few scratches and bumps here and there. But your vehicle is by and large okay. But imagine, instead of a 5 kilometer speed at which you are going, let's say that was 20 times the speed and you were 100 kilometers per hour and you happen to bang into a wall. Finish. That finishes the vehicle itself. The vehicle is done and dusted, you can do nothing about it. It goes. Maybe your life is also at harm, but I'm assuming that if you had airbags, it would have deployed and probably saved your life. But the vehicle is totaled. Now this is what we call a concavity, where one single event can change the entire journey of that. Although smaller errors or smaller effects can continue as is where. That is the concept of concavity. Convexity, on the other hand, is that only big efforts can benefit. This is example of a weight lift. If you did 10 reps of 10 kg barbell weightlifting, it will do you good in a limited way. But even if you were able to do 1 rep of a 100 kg weight, believe me, it has a far more greater health benefit to you than doing 10 kg reps. While in math they total to the same, but in terms of creating antifragility, the 100 kgs is far more, creates resilience in you. So this is what is the concept of concavity and convexity, which is very, very effective in the way we look at decision making. He talks about how to move from fragility to anti-fragile. How can in our daily life we become a lot more anti-fragile? First up is, can we bring redundancy? And he talks about nature. We have 2 kidneys because nature thinks kidney is a very important organ. Humans cannot survive without it. We need another. So redundancy is the way nature has found to create you as anti-fragile. We need to learn from that. So create redundancy to ensure that the absence of one function is easily replaceable, and that's the way to go. Second is, you can make small and independent errors. As long as you're making the process is divided multiple processes, and very, very small errors are still allowable. Instead of one big error that can kind of kill your enterprise or kill your organization, so on and so forth, that big activity is divided into multiple small ones, and those small errors are still passé. You will be able to identify it, you will be able to correct it, you will be able to move on. Yes, there will be an impact, but the impact is small. As long as you're able to do it, you still become anti-fragile. Third is, if you have alternatives or options, that makes you anti-fragile. If there is not only one way, but there are multiple ways, and you have multiple ways to navigate a certain journey, then that also makes you anti-fragile. Fragile is when you have only one option, you become more fragile. Then he talks about what is called the barbell strategy. Can you combine two different outcomes to get a better result at the end of the day? To give you a simple example, taking high risks can be a problem because that risk, if it doesn't pay off in terms of giving good returns, you could end up losing all your capital in the investment parlance. On the other hand, if you play it all safe, then you don't end up even beating inflation. How do you play to safety yet get great returns? One way to do that possibly is park, say 75-80% of your money in places which are relatively safe, which are yielding you reasonable return. But the left 20-25%, you take hyper risk-oriented, return-oriented investments where you could get a 10x return in the next 5 years. The weighted average of both this will mean that at the end of the day, you're not risking all your capital, yet the return on a combined basis will be much higher than the overall return that somebody who's taking risk enjoys. So this could be what is called a barbell strategy. How to use fragile and anti-fragile together to generate a much superior outcome. He brings this whole concept of Lindy effect. In terms of looking at situations, you look at two situations. In case of perishables, the life of the perishable that has already gone is actually to be subtracted from the beneficial life of the perishable. Let us take the example of a human life. A human life is for 100 years. If somebody is already aged about 80, then we can deduce that there is only 20 more years in the life of that person. Same is the case for animals, same is the case for vegetables, same is the case for many other perishable products. On the other hand, on non-perishable, the Lindy effect states that if something has lasted for a certain period of time, then it's likely that it's going to last an even number of period into the future, if not more. Let's say a technology, let's take an idea or a company. If it has lasted for 50 years as an example, the assumption is that it has seen its amount of challenges in the last 50 years. It has been able to overcome all those challenges and continue its course. Therefore, in that sense, it's become anti-fragile and it's likely to last another 50 years, if not more. That is what is called a Lindy effect or a Lindy factor. Not that it's always true, but it's a very useful concept to keep in mind that with every passing day, we as humans and organizations face lots of challenges, and the way we overcome it and continue adds to our anti-fragility, and we become stronger by every challenge that we overcome. He also talks about this whole concept of via negativa, and this is an ancient Stoic philosophy as well, which looks at how do I look at things in a negative way. And the simple example is, if you ask people what makes them happy, they will struggle to tell you because they really can't pinpoint what are the factors that lead them to happiness. But if you ask the same question in a negative way, what are the factors that will make you unhappy? People are far more quicker to come up with answers. So sometimes looking at life and looking at alternatives, looking at solutions in a negative way can be a huge positive in terms of how you generate outcomes. And that's what is called via negativa. Last but not the least, he talks about less is more. He defines data is equal to noise plus signal. Every single day we are bombarded by a host of data that comes to us. And each of that data point has embedded within it a certain amount of noise and a certain amount of signal. By signal, a direction, an information, so on and so forth. Now, his view is there is just too much of it coming, so sometimes you just need to ignore all of it for you to make a sensible decision. I'll give you a classic example. Every single morning, the stock market either goes up or goes down. At the end of the day, the stock market is down 1,000 points. Let's say the Sensex is down 1,000 points. Does it even have a meaning? Absolutely not. Because the next day morning, it can be up another 1,000 points. But if you observed Sensex a year ago and today you're observing Sensex, after 365 days, the Sensex lever can give you some signal. It can tell you whether the economy is on an upward swing or a downward swing. Is it Sensex on an upward swing, downward swing? You could gather a lot more data and insights about what could have happened in that period, not just the noise. So sometimes, especially in cases like these where you're analyzing investments, only when you take data over a longish period of time can you make sensible decisions. If you tend to make decisions based on these short-term things, then you could kind of be making a huge mistake in terms of decision making. So overall, anti-fragility has to do with the way you perceive things around you, the way you act based on variety of different factors. It's a fantastic book, and my belief is that if certain amount of these ideas we encounter and we are able to recollect what Taleb has said about it, I'm sure we will have a much richer decision making that goes in our favor.